Welcome back to In Our Own Defense podcast. We're your hosts, Attorney A.D. Winters and Dr. Dolores Tarver. We're here with Judge Carlos Moore. He's a judge in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and in Grenada, Mississippi. He's also the managing partner of the Cochran Law Firm in the Mississippi Delta. And he's here helping us unpack this racism and administration of justice. Welcome back, Judge. I really want to talk to you, Judge. There's so much happening in the world. We got COVID, we got a pandemic, and we got these racial protesters happening in the aftermath of another killing of an unarmed African-American with Mr. Floyd and countless others, and Breonna Taylor. And we're living in a moment in which there's constant protest. It's been a perfect storm where African-Americans' voices is being reverberated and echoed with allies. And this has been through this constant protesting, worldwide protests, and international concerns, international condemnation, defunding or reshifting the balance of budgets from police forces to put in those mental health capacities. We're hearing a lot of that happen. But one of the biggest concerns is that when African Americans are being assassinated, murdered, killed, slain at the hands of police, they get to court and the court says, well, they have a qualified immunity. And the U.S. Supreme Court first introduced this qualified immunity doctrine in 1967, originally with the rationale of protecting law enforcement from frivolous lawsuits and financial liability in cases where they acted in good faith. And then over the course of time, that doctrine has developed into a series of judicial decisions, several of which where you had the qualified immunity, shield policy, and it shifted to constitutional, they would not have liability for constitutional violations unless a reasonable officer would have believed that there was unconstitutionality of his actions were clearly established. I was like, what does that even mean? And what do you think about qualified immunity, Your Honor?
Yeah, the qualified immunity is something that's been a bane of my existence since I've been a civil rights lawyer for the past 14 years. We go up against officers, and that's the first thing they're going to plead is qualified immunity, usually in their cases, in the civil cases, when you're trying to hold them and the cities liable for their actions in killing unarmed Black men or women, whatever it may be. It may be some that survive, but they were brutalized or victims of excessive force. But the first hurdle we have to cross is qualified immunity, and we have to show that there was a similar case in our circuit. I'm in the Fifth Circuit in Mississippi, so Mississippi, Texas, and Louisiana, that we're all in the federal Fifth Circuit. So we have to show that either the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals or the U.S. Supreme Court has already declared that course of action is unconstitutional. If it's a case of first impression, they get off. I mean, they get qualified immunity because it has not been clearly established that what they did was illegal, unconstitutional. So you basically and if you can create a scenario where it's a first impression and you can act like you know any better, you get off. And it doesn't matter if it happened in the 11th Circuit. The 11th, Atlanta, just say you're in Atlanta, you're in the 11th Circuit. If something has been declared unconstitutional in Atlanta, it doesn't affect us in Mississippi. And so you get off because it has not been declared illegal in your particular circuit. And so that's the bad thing about it.
It's exhausting. Are you, I know that you're aware in the Supreme Court, there's like 8 cases that are happening right now that are available. They're waiting to get the 4th vote to get them onto the docket at the Supreme Court. We have Justice Sotomayor and another justice. They're saying that we need to have these cases. We need to relook at it. Essentially the critics, it's almost like a catch-22 to these victims and their families that have been executed in a lot of cases. It's like heads, the police win, and tails, you lose. It's that and Justice Clarence Thomas, the court's most conservative member, has called for a revisiting of the doctrine of qualified immunity. And that's really telling with his new position when he helped turn the tide on Louisiana and Oregon, who had that non-unanimous jury for these big crimes, and they were going at 10-2 route. And so to have, and Justice Thomas voted for to make it unanimous. He spoke very eloquent in that. And I don't know if in his older age, his biracial children now are coming in the fold, and he's realizing that this is dangerous to have us out here, that if we don't make these police go checked. And so I think that's two, and it needs two more to just vote those cases on, those 8 cases. So that's going to be interesting. Are you aware of any legislation that may be promulgated right now that may help get rid of qualified immunity, Judge?
Yeah, I've been reading about legislation that I believe Senators Harris and Booker and maybe Markey were going to introduce or have introduced in Congress to do away with the qualified immunity, or it's either a bill or a resolution calling for the end of qualified immunity. So I've been encouraged by that. I hope it goes somewhere in Congress because qualified immunity is a creature of the Supreme Court. But if Congress comes in and declares that it shouldn't be looked at or does away with it by law, they have to follow the law. So hopefully, if we don't get it through the Supreme Court, we can get some relief through Congress.
Definitely. And so I think there is some, to Dr. Tarver, to a lay person, this is exciting news that we have some of the, you're kind of on the inside of watching. Nobody wants to see how law is made. It's almost like watching sausage made. So what the Supreme Court is ebbing and flowing toward that route, and then we have a congressional route. So 2 of the 3, branches of government are looking forward to trying to do that. That's really powerful if the Supreme Court overturns that. And then if we get a law, like the judge said, that's really exciting too. Speaking of laws, this week we had, while there's still absolutely no arrest and accountability being held in the Breonna Taylor, say her name, Louisville, unanimously, the city metro council there in Louisville, Kentucky, voted unanimously the Breonna Taylor Law to get rid and ban and abolish no knock warrants. They're disturbing to me at the outset. To me, it's just a complete violation of the Fourth Amendment. It turns in the face of everything we learned. This is not terrorism, but they told us to be careful. Once you start giving up some of your rights, you kind of give away all of them. They didn't go to a FISA court. They get to go to their buddies, their fishing buddy judge, to get a warrant signed, or maybe even just a magistrate, that they get to get a no-knock warrant. Can you tell our listeners essentially what is the quick version? What is a no-knock warrant, Judge?
Basically, you get to barge in someone's house unannounced, and that's exactly what they did to Breonna Tayller. So they would have had to give the facts to the judge, tell the judge who they were looking for, where they were going, and why they needed to get in the house unannounced. And some judge heard the facts, read the facts, and signed a warrant. And they went to Breonna Taylor's house looking for her boyfriend, I believe, who was suspected of a crime. And the bad thing about it, they should have known if they go into the girlfriend's house, she could be in the house. She's an EMT. She hadn't done anything wrong. So if you go in there and they're in the bed together or somewhere close together, you could possibly harm her. And so she ends up getting killed. She was not even a suspect. And so they took no thought about her life and went in that house and killed that girl. And with a no-knock warrant, nobody knows who's coming in. They don't know if it's law enforcement or intruder. So you're going to pull your gun and try to defend yourself. You have, in Mississippi, we have the castle doctrine. So your house is your castle, and you have the right to shoot any intruders. And so you setting yourself up for a disaster with the no-knock warrant. So I'm glad to see that the legislation, not only the city council there in Louisville has passed an act forbidding the no-knock warrants from being issued, but I understand now that Senator Paul Rand has introduced some legislation in Congress and the Senate to outlaw the no-knock warrant. So that's even better for across the country.
Yeah, the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act is what Senator Rand Paul he's offered. He's also someone who said it was too vague for the anti-lynching than it did last week. But that is some good news. I'm sure that his constituents almost forced his hand. That's very popular with the constituents there. But it is a high time that we eliminate those. We got to eradicate those. Those things are disturbing. And like you said, the castle doctrine, Supreme Court said your home is the sacrosanct. It's that sacrosanct sanatorium. It's more important than the church. This is your home. This is the place we should be free. The Fourth Amendment was created just so we could be free in our papers and our persons and our property. We should be free from this. And they bust in. And what was so disturbing is that after this baby, she's a baby to me, after this lady's dead, they found out that the suspect that they were looking for, because they weren't even looking for her boyfriend, the suspect that they were looking for was already in custody, Judge.
Wow, that's even worse. Okay.
It's worse. It's horrible. That's why no-knock warrants don't have a place. There's no value to them. We always said this. You learned this in law school, just like I did, Judge, that you would rather let countless guilty people go free, then you end up putting the one innocent person in harm's way. There's no reason. There's no reason for high-speed chases. You know, when you're going to end up hurting some people in traffic, you got to make sure that you back off. In Houston, the same thing happened. They actually got the suspect. They pulled the no-knock warrant. They bust in claiming there was all of this dope they were going to find. It was just these two old white people. They were selling, they were selling marijuana, but they bust in on them. The people thought it was an intruder. They shoot at the police. The police just SWAT blazed these people to death, just countless bullets, and found out that the police officer lied in the warrant. Lied and said that he had seen all of this pounds and pounds and almost a ton of marijuana. It was just so, elaborate lie. And, these officers were killed. These people are dead. The people in their home were dead. And they end up charging that officer. It was so much consternation in Houston that they ended up charging that officer. I don't think there's any way to be concerned about where I stand on it. I hate no warrants. The home is sacrosanct, Your Honor. This week, speaking of the home, this week, and not to violate your attorney-client privilege, but this is public record that I've noticed, I've watched. There's been a lot of Gen Zs, these Generation Zs. They've gone to school. Our kids, they are essentially the same as our kids. These kids, this new generation, that hate is not trickling down like they thought it would. That racism is a little bit tough. A lot of well-to-do people like you and Dr. Tarver, all that money you guys have, you guys can send your kids to these great schools and you have all this money. So if anybody's post-racial, you guys are, because you're like, hey, my kid can go anywhere he wants to. I could feed, I could do anything. But what ends up happening is these kids now just love each other, white, black, green, blue. And then if you do something to harm their friends on the football team, or basketball team, or whatever setting, their classmates, they are checking their parents. And I've seen on the internet, one girl, videotaped her parents and their racist comments. And then most recently, there's a Kaylee Smith. She exposes her parents' racism there in Mississippi in Jones County, which is supposed to be the free state of Jones from the movie, but Jones County. And the county came back and arrested this girl for electronic transmission of something that caused some sort of threat. I couldn't even read the law. I was like, this is exhausting, just the law. Whenever you have a law that's tongue twisted like that, it's exhausting. So you're like, this is crap. And so you had the privilege of helping with the representation. And can you tell us a little bit more about that, if that's not a violation of attorney-client privilege?
Yeah, it's been in the news that she was arrested initially for a felony for posting injurious messages to Facebook, and they were saying she had the intent for her parents to be harmed by posting the messages. That law was struck down and as unconstitutional in April of this year by the Mississippi Court of Appeals, saying it was too broad and it was limiting people's First Amendment rights. And so when they found out that they couldn't get on a felony, they downgraded it to two misdemeanor counts of posting obscene messages via electronic medium. And I'm still trying to figure out what was the obscenity. She simply posted the truth. Now, what was obscene is what her father called black people. That's obscene. But all she did was publish the truth. So it was sad. 20 years old, her parents filed papers against her, and she goes to jail. When you have it on video, her stepmother is beating her for being an end lover, as her father called her. and nobody goes to jail for assault and battery, but you have somebody who just outs the racist in their family, and they go to jail in the free state of Jones County. So that's pretty sad. So we came to her assistance. Her biological mother reached out to one of my colleagues who's an attorney in Chicago. He flew down. He knew he needed Mississippi assistance, or somebody licensed in Mississippi, so he asked me to assist. And so I drove down, and we had a press conference yesterday. Just the very threat of us coming down made the judge release her from jail on Thursday evening. We did a social media campaign, and the media picked it up, and people were just outraged that she would be sitting in jail for a made-up crime. And so the judge let her out the day before we got down there when he saw that we were doing a campaign, because it was inexplicable, it was unjust, and he knew there was no reason she should be in jail. As a judge, I would have never signed that warrant. I mean, it makes no sense that a judge would do so. And sometimes I think we need to do away with judicial immunity, because police officers have qualified immunity, but we almost have absolute immunity as judges. I mean, whatever we do, we cannot be held responsible for it. Now, prosecutors have prosecutorial immunity, but there are some exceptions to that. But judges have almost, what we have is almost paramount to absolute immunity. No matter what we do, who we harm, if we have that robe on and we do it, it's nothing nobody can do to us about it. And that's pretty sad.
That's disturbing. I watched that with this judge in Louisiana. She was, she was racist, like no ifs, ands, and buts about it. Right outside of Baton Rouge, she resigned because the people, she was a district court judge. That's big court to us in Louisiana. And the masses just got after her just every day until we got her to resign because she was gonna have to go before the Judiciary Council. And I used to represent the Judiciary Council as Assistant Attorney General. I was represented them in certain aspects. And it's unconscionable to have someone with that kind of power and influence over our lives, over the citizenry's lives, that we allowed these people to go unchecked. That's just, no disrespect to judges, Your Honor, but that's disturbing. No mental health training.
Right, no bias training.
Nobody.
And now you can do whatever you want to do with no consequence.
Going unchecked.
Wow.
This has been my favorite show, and I know it's so much that we try to unpack in this show. Judge, we're so thankful really to have you on this show. There's a couple of things we always try to, on this show, Dr. Tarver and I, we do our best to try to leave the people with some takeaways. The so what analysis, I always call it. We've done this show, so what? We want to leave people with a way forward. So what are some way forwards for, whether it's Grenada County, Mississippi, or the United States of America? What are some ways forward, considering these unarmed African Americans being killed, considering this qualified immunity that police officers have, considering some of these damning things that are happening in our society, where it's constantly happening upon people that look like us? What are some ways forward? What do you think that we can do to help eradicate some of this problem?
It's going to have to be a change in policy. The racism is systemic, so we have to dismantle some of these systems. We have to recognize white supremacy has affected most of the institutions of government, institutions and pillars of government and society, and we have to recognize that. And I believe after George Floyd, we have finally got to that first step of recognizing we have a problem. We have been in denial. White America has been in denial for a long time. But you can see by the protest and who's protesting that they now see that we have a problem. And so now that they recognize it, I believe we can deal with it, because we have long known as the victims of the white supremacy that there was a problem, but they seem to not know what they were doing to us. But now they know, and we're going to work together in tandem to change some policy. We need to follow up with the demonstrations. I applaud the peaceful protests that Black Lives Matter have led across the country. But now it's time for those of us in the advocacy realm to assist them and lead them and get in the Congress, into some of these state legislatures and city councils to get legislative changes. And then we need to fight for judicial changes, where the judges have the realm to make some changes, Supreme Court or otherwise. We need to make those changes judicially. So we need a lot of reform, and some people saying defunding, dismantling some of the systems and just rebuilding them from the ground up. Because sometimes it's so convoluted that you can't reform something that's so bad. It has to be totally destroyed and built anew. So we need to decide what can be destroyed, what can be what needs to be destroyed, and what needs to be rehabilitated, and what needs to be just totally built from the ground up.
Yes, and I would offer, Judge, that you know, from a structured way from our military service, you know, working at these U.S. embassies throughout the world, one of the things that we always did, and the embassies that U.S. embassies do across the world, is we advocate for certain aspects of our interest, our American interest. One of the things that we were consistently doing in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia was that we would tell them, our ambassador and the staff, ambassadorial staff, we would tell these countries, hey, you need to return Jewish artifacts. You need to do this as it relates to these artifacts that were stolen from Jews in World War II, and you need to return those immediately. You have them in museums. You need to return them to Israel. And we have gotten away with doing that for decades and decades and decades since World War II. And you know, countries were capitulating because they were concerned about that American dollar. Are we going to give them some sort of subsidies or gifts or grants or loans or whatever? We're going to give them military weaponry. So they'll capitulate and say, look, I'll be glad to give away this if you can give me some money. But what happened recently, what I started noticing my latter part of my embassy staff work, was that people started saying, when you do right by African Americans, when you start giving reparations to African Americans, when you give them land, when you do right by them, then you can contact us and tell us what to do with the things that we may have fallen short from grace from. I think so on an international level, I believe that there's something that needs to be done, that we need to speak one voice through, you know, Congressional Black Caucus, Black Lives Matter, NAACP, National Urban League. We have to have this stuff promulgated, my suggestion, and it has to be promulgated in things like World Court, International Court of Human Rights. These things have to be taken to an international realm, because that can change it, number one. Number two, take the UN out of the US. Take the United Nations and make it go to Brussels. Let it be in Brussels. Then we don't have that at-home cooking, as it were, as we call it in the courtroom. You don't get to do that. If we take that on an international level, then people can hear us better, not from in here. They get to hear us from out here. And then if we focus on a national, certain things are monolithic. There's across the board. Every African American wants safety of their children. We want an education for our children. We want a safe home. We want a means, a workable, livable wage, some income, not as much as you and Dr. Tarver, but just some morsels that we want to be able to go buy a sandwich or something. So, you know, we have those tenets that are just simple tenets across the board. When our kids leave the house, just being Black, they should be expected to come home. When kids are leaving the home, it's almost like they're going to war. That if you're about to get deployed, or you're in some dangerous job, and that you have to worry about their safety. We have this thing in our country called the talk. Well, we as African Americans have to have a talk with our sons and now our daughters. We have to have a talk with them about somebody potentially taking their life when they're doing something innocuous. Or I don't care if they've been breaking the law. That's not a way to take your life. You can't execute anybody, Judge. Now, you're an officer of the court like I am. You're an officer of the court. You had to go and graduate from high school with good enough grades to get you into a real good college. You had to graduate from college with real good grades to be able to get accepted into a law school. You had to take the LSAT to get accepted into law school. You had to graduate and learn enough in law school to pass a bar. Then you had to pass a character and fitness and a background check that was like a secret security clearance in order to sit for the bar. Then you took the bar and you had to pass it. After you passed the bar, you had to get sworn in. And then you have to been on the straight and narrow, because you can get your law license taken in a heartbeat. You can get a guy with a GED and he can go into the courthouse and call himself an officer of the court, and he's been racist Billy Bob backwards ass, and excuse my language, but they get to do this, and they get to walk into a courtroom and lie half the time and exaggerate. And people go to jail for tons and tons and decades of years for something that they should have got help with. It's frustrating, Judge, and we need a way forward that's powerful. And we need something powerful, that's institutionalized. You have to fight institutions with institutions. So you were talking in one instance, you talk about a law institute or center of excellence that you're trying to birth. Is there any way, what can we do to help you? And can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, before I do that, I can tell you about that, but I meant to say a way forward, and you mentioned it, reparations. I believe America's problem is that we are trying to get to forgiveness without atonement. There cannot really be true forgiveness and without atonement, and you cannot go against Scripture. There needs to be some atonement. I mean, the Jews have gotten their atonement, Japanese got their atonement from America, but blacks have not gotten our atonement. And we built this country. We got over here 400 years ago, spent 200-something years as slaves, and then another 100 years in the Jim Crow era, and then we still going through this era of police brutality and excessive force. So America needs to pay what's due. And once we have atonement, we can go forward. But you cannot offend your brother and not ask for forgiveness and pay your debt and think you're just going to be all right. That goes against the law of nature. It goes against the biblical law. And we're going to have these reparations. And I think once we have them, we can move forward as a nation together and one people. What I have proposed is that we have a center similar to if you saw the movie Deacons for Defense. We have some kind of academy where we are preparing blacks, because just last night there was another killing in Atlanta. You need to know how to interact with the police and members of the criminal justice system. And you need to know how to defend yourself properly. You have the right to resist any unlawful arrest. You have the right to stand your ground when vigilantes come after you. The Second Amendment applies to blacks just as it does whites. And so a lot of us are not comfortable with guns, but it's either us or them. And if they're gonna carry their guns and come after us, we have the right to defend ourselves. And we need to have a Black Justice and Defense Academy is what I'm proposing to get us ready, because this is war. I mean, only the strong survive. And I am sick of people getting away, killing us with impunity. I don't support violence, but we have the laws that protect us, and self-defense is lawful. And we need to stop being scared and stop being jellybacks, because while maybe my child today could be yours tomorrow, and we all need to be prepared and fight to live. And as the NAACP put out in the hashtag, we are done dying. And as the NBA has said, the National Bar Association has said in no uncertain terms, we will live. Enough is enough, and time out for foolishness. We're gonna live.
And that's very eloquent, Judge. And I want to definitely say this to you: if there's any way in our own defense can help, as you build this center of excellence, as you build this and develop this, please count on us. That's right, Dr. Tarver. Please count on us and allow us to be, whether we're professors or any role that you need us, development board members. Please include us. We know that you birthed amazing things, and we know that God's going to bless you to birth this into something incredible. We know the talent that you have and the talented team that you have around you, so we're really excited about that. Dr. Tarver, did you have any final words before we ask Judge Moore to give us his contact information?
Well, definitely. I appreciate you, Judge, addressing the mental health concerns, and that is an area that I know that we have to move forward with decriminalizing mental health, but also training for our judges. That I recognize that a lot of psychologists actually used to provide training, and then agencies started cutting funding to psychologists, so we stopped providing that training, and I see the training has disappeared. And so one of those areas you mentioned are some things that we need to look at and reevaluate how we want to move forward. That's one of the things that has to happen. We have got to have licensed providers conducting these trainings for anti-bias, for judges, for police officers, for anybody that's an officer of the law, whether that's in the court system or any other system. And that's missing, and as long as that's missing, people won't be able to address some of these systemic issues. So that is one area that if you're not considering for your institute, I hope that you do, that mental health piece. That's a vital piece, and I would do everything in my power to support that. And work with local therapists in the area to provide any kind of training that we can.
Well, I appreciate that, Dr. Tarver. We take you up on it as well.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been another episode of In Our Own Defense podcast. We are your host, Dr. Tarver, and myself, Attorney A.D. Winters. we've been discussing racism and administration of justice with Judge Carlos Moore. Judge Moore, can you please tell us how our listeners and viewers can reach out to you? How can they follow you on social media?
Okay. Gladly. I am on Instagram. It's Judge Carlos Moore. It's my handle on Instagram. I am on LinkedIn as Judge Carlos Moore. You can follow me on Facebook under my name, Carlos Moore. I also have a Facebook page under Judge Carlos Moore. I'm on Twitter as Esquire Moore. And I think that is about it. You can find me on the web at www.cochranfirm.com. And my Cochran Firm-MS Delta is my Instagram professional handle. So we'll be happy to communicate with you. A lot of my business and a lot of cases come through social media because people will inbox me before they call me. So we will respond to all the messages, and we're happy to assist you.
Well, you've been doing groundbreaking work there in Mississippi and the Delta and Tennessee, in the Mid-South. So we're lucky. We know the people in Grenada are lucky to have a fair person on the bench that is astute leader, that doesn't have all these hang-ups. We know you and your family are world-class. We're really proud to know you. We're so thankful that you came on our show. We know you got another show you got to do in a few minutes, but this has been In Our Own Defense podcast, and this concludes this episode of In Our Own Defense. We're your host, Attorney A.D. Winters and Dr. Dolores Tarver. For more information about our show, just go to Instagram at In Our Own Defense or Facebook at In Our Own Defense Facebook page, or you can email us at inourown defense@gmail.com.